There we go. Get right in there, Jay.
No, it
Hello,
always gets
happy
me like this.
Tuesday, and holy shit. How is everybody doing? I'm John, the Bourbon Finder, here with my good buddy Jay. You know him quite well by now, I'm sure. And tonight we are joined by the world famous Will Schragis from Barrel Craft Spirits. Will, how are you?
Doing great.
Jay, how are you tonight?
Man, I'm good. It has been a day, but it's good to be here. It's
Okay.
good to cap off with this.
Certainly. So, as Whiskey Cam is showing everybody tonight, we've got the Barrel Rye, Dovetail, and Barrel Bourbon Batch 24 that we're going to go through. I think we're going to pour some of these, chat it up a little bit, talk to Will, see what he's got to say for us.
Yeah.
Happy hokey. Good to see you. And I don't know, are you ready to dig in, or are you still warming up over there with your nose in that glass?
And yeah, I admittedly, I just opened a Woodford Reserve wheat whiskey, and I thought that it would be. So I've been surprised. I've been buying a lot of random stuff from Woodford, and it's usually been good. But I think that this tastes like peach rings and ethanol. So I think I'm ready to move on from that. I'm a little over it already.
Okay. That's an aggressive set of tasting notes, but I like it.
I mean, first taste, but it was not well behaved.
Will, what are you getting into, my man?
I started with the Barrel Rye batch number 3.
Excellent.
Oh.
I think I will do the same.
Oh shit! I got that one here. Yeah.
It's interesting. Nick, our single barrel program manager, and I don't want to say argue, but discuss the order of this specific tasting all the time, because it makes the most sense to do bourbon rye dovetail based on like ease of drinking and proof.
Sure.
But then she likes to do dovetail first all the time, because dovetail is like kind of the most inviting whiskey we make. And I like to do rye first, because everything we make is cask strength and it's going to hurt. And the rye is the most abrasive thing on the table. So it's like, may as well get it out of the way and like beat
Let's
the
take your
hell out
medicine.
of someone's palate. Yeah.
I dig it.
And it's like, neither one of us thinks the other one is wrong, but it's like this like rye, bourbon batch, dovetail. What do you do? What order? We must have had the conversation like 50 times over the past year.
I like that.
So, but I'm the only one on the show, so I get to pick. So I did rye first.
Okay, that works out great. I'll go with you.
Yeah, maybe I'll join you there.
I was setting these up and I was thinking to myself, do I want to drink these in proof order, or do I want to try to recommend in the green room how we run these? But I thought it might be a little bit better to just kind of throw it at you and see what sticks.
Yeah, I would suggest rye, bourbon, dovetail in this situation. What I think is interesting is the bourbon is the lowest proof of the 3, but the bourbon drinks the hottest of the 3. For a variety of reasons, but I'll wait to see what you guys think on that. But almost everyone I've talked to about it in the past month or two feels that way. So I can talk about the whiskey unless you want to sort of start talking about barrel a little bit first.
Yeah, let's get a little bit about you. I mean, this is the first time having you on, so why don't you give us a little bit about you and what you do, and then we'll kind of segue on in.
Sure. So my name is Will. I was employee number 1 for Barrel Craft Spirits about 5 years ago.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. Before that, I worked for a French Caribbean rum import company that's now called Bourbon, but was called the House of Agricole at the time. And before that, I worked in the wine industry, in retail and auction, and then on the floor in restaurants in New York a little bit. Joe and I met when I was the buyer at a retail store called Zacky's in New York. And he had just started Barrel Bourbon, which was the name of the company at the time. And I was, I think, the 3rd store that he visited, and we got along and we sort of chatted for a while. And then over the course of a year, we'd like go to Whiskey Fest together and do tastings and talk about it. And I was ready to leave the job in retail, and I got offered this amazing opportunity with Rum Clement, and he was like, "Go take it, but like I'd like to stay in touch." And so I did. I think it was about a year and a half. I worked for Rum Clement. It felt like 6 years, but a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And there was a lot of restructuring that company while I was there in a good way. And I went from like brand ambassador in New York to like distribution manager on the East Coast over the course of the time that I was there. And then Joe got back in touch with me, and we had been like texting, and we had gone out to dinner a few times, and he said, company's growing, we're ready to hire a person. I want to be a national company. You're in charge. Have fun. Which is a terrifying but amazing thing for someone to say to you when you're like 26. And since then, we've gone from 6 states to 46 states. We've gone from one expression to, depending on how you think about the single barrels and the private releases, anywhere from like 27 to 350, depending on how you like what's its own expression, what's not.
Sure.
We have an amazing sales team that works around the country, small but amazing. If there's anyone on here that has met anyone, we've got Matt Green down in Florida, who does the Southeast. We have a woman named Eva Mulcahy in the Northeast out of New York, Stephanie Bear in Colorado that does sort of like all of the states that you have trouble finding on a map. It's like everyone that you don't know where it is Stephanie's state.
Nice.
And then Jessica Kearns does Texas and New Mexico. And the 5 of us are like on the phone every day, just trying to keep track of all the whiskeys we're putting out. And even in a year where none of us can really travel and things are so uncertain, it's like I'm on the phone with all of them every day. I get to help Joe design whiskeys. I get to argue with distributors about weird stuff. I get to learn about compliance in every state. It's like it is a very stressful dream job, I think is the way that I would describe it. But I think Joe, to his credit, the owner and founder of Barrell, he surrounded himself by people that were good at things that were different than what he was doing. And my job, beyond the like minutia of sales, which takes up most of it, is like staying up on all of the things that are going on in the booze world and talking to people like you and to consumers and to bars and to liquor stores about what are the things that they're not finding from the brands that they love, and like then trying to innovate with Joe on how to make really great whiskey and also deliver things that are maybe a little bit further out of people's comfort zones, but in a way that they're looking for. So we stick to our guns with batches of bourbon, but if you followed the brand for the past year, we've put out a lot of cool and weird stuff. And we don't need to go into it now, but give me a couple drinks on the podcast, and I'm happy to tell you about like how deep the rabbit hole is about to get in the next 4 to 5 months with us. And so
that's great.
We like to get weird, man. We love it.
We do like the rabbit hole, yeah.
Not necessarily the
awesome.
distillery. Nothing bad against them, but no, we're not releasing anything from the Rabbit Hole distillery. I mean the metaphorical finished whiskey blend Rabbit Hole.
I prefer it like that. I think that's a good decision.
So anyway, we're drinking rye batch number 3.
Yeah, yeah.
So our company is known first and foremost for our bourbon. We're like, my email address is will@barrelbourbon.com, or until last year, our business card said Barrel Bourbon. And I think secondly, at this point, we're known for Dovetail, which is the third whiskey we'll try, and also a lot of our private releases and single barrels. But it was really important for us to have a rye out because so many of the people that we talk to and work with love rye, and so many of the producers that we work with make rye. And we released rye batch 1, which was a very malted barley focused rye, which is wonderful, but sort of outside of the idea of what people in America think of rye whiskey. And then we released rye batch 2, which is almost stranger because it had this wonderful malted Polish rye. So it was 100% rye, but it was malted. But it almost read like a single malt with that like rye spice or dilly quality. And it was still all virgin oak. It was the Polish rye was virgin oak, and the American rye was virgin oak. And what we really wanted to do with rye batch 3 was to bring it a little bit closer to what people were looking for if they said they like American rye. Not because we didn't want to be strange, but because we like that canon a lot. But I think one of the tragedies of the bourbon and rye laws is 100% virgin oak helps you make decisions about barrel aging and raising barrels and raising distillate because you don't have to make that much of a decision, or you talk about char or barrel size or occasionally what wood. But it makes it really hard to make old spirits that the distillate shines through, because it's very, very rare that you find something at 4 or 6 or 9 or 15 years that spent its entire life in virgin oak that isn't wood driven, if not completely wood dominated.
Right.
It's just the nature of what virgin oak, especially charred American virgin oak, is going to do to distillate. It doesn't matter what you enter at. It doesn't really matter what climate you're aging it in. It's just going to be really oaky. And so the goal with rye batch 3 was to take the flavor profile from Indiana rye, and I'm going to say Indiana, but everyone here knows what I'm talking about. So just fill in the blank yourself. And take that like really herbaceous, wonderful, lean flavor profile that is so popular from the 95.5 mash bill and blend into it a little bit more restraint from old Canadian rye and a little bit of the like really complex fermentation of malted rye from Poland. But we really wanted Trip, our distillery operations manager, talks about this all the time, that he wanted to let the flavor drive the bus is his term, which sounds really cool when he says it, but it sounds like a cliche when I say it. But so it was like 95.5. That's driving the bus, and then what can we put on it to make it like a bus that is unlike anyone else's bus? And so that's kind of how it came together. And it was a big batch for us. When we make rye, we make a lot of it because when you look at our production schedule, we just don't have that much time to switch in and out of rye. That we want to bring the barrels in, and then we want to use them, and then we want to be focusing on American whiskey and rum and bourbon for a while. And so we make big batches of rye. So it's been out for a while. So I don't taste it on these interviews as often as some of the other releases, but every time I go back to it, it's like, I really love, the thing I love most about it is how mature and also distillate forward it can be at the same time. That just doesn't exist in high-end rye in America, because in order to be an American rye, you have to be virgin oak. And then outside of America, like no one's using virgin oak because it's more expensive and there's no reason for it. And so that blend is just, there's just not a lot of that around. Which I guess that's what I love about it.
That's awesome. And this comes in at a pretty hefty 58% and change. So, it's nice. Some rye. I mean, I like, sorry, frog in my throat. Some people I know really like overproof ryes, and they're like, give me proof and rye. And I'm like, I don't think that's really for me. So it's kind of nice to see something that, is well proofed, but not going to be excruciating.
It's interesting that it's pretty hot I guess the proof is high. There's 14-year-old Canadian rye in it, and a lot of the 14-year-old Canadian rye barrels that we release as single barrels are very high proof. Yeah. And so in doing the sorting, the power of those barrels gets lost in blends when they're not with each other. In fact, it even gets lost when they're with each other sometimes, because each one is so unique at a high proof, and you blend them together and suddenly the ethanol is still there and the things that were interesting about them weren't necessarily there anymore. And so we cherry picked actually the lower proof 14-year-old Canadian rye barrels for this batch because we wanted it to be palatable, and we also didn't want to dominate the Indiana, which usually comes in like the high 1-teens.
Okay. I think that was smart. I think I did have one or two of your 14-year Canadian that were, if not hazmat, were super close. And yeah, those, I mean, it would have been hard to blend those. I think those would have dominated quite a bit. So it's interesting to get that tidbit there.
Yeah, it's not so much that they dominate as you lose what's special about them. It's like when you put a 147 proof rye barrel into a batch with 25 other barrels,
it goes away.
The fact that it was so aggressively itself isn't really relevant anymore. But when it's, I think, and I love really high proof spirits. Part of it is that my palate is dead, and so it doesn't matter how high it is at this point. But I just really love high proof spirits in general. But what I really like about high proof single barrels is the same two barrels at that proof, even if they were next to each other their entire lives, are so different because there's nothing to hide behind. There's no water. There's no like oak Kojner to hide behind. It's like 147, 148 proof in used oak. Like it's all weird environmental stuff and distillate at that point. But once you blend it into something else, it's just adding a little bit more proof gallonage. It's not necessarily special anymore. And so we do a lot of sorting barrels on what to do as single barrels and what to do as blends by not pulling out the quote unquote better barrels as single barrels, but pulling out the ones that are in balance and interesting by themselves and would not necessarily be good ingredients for blends.
Okay. Yeah. That seems fair. I guess too, like, I'm sure you had no abundance of just completely bonkers proof stuff at Rem Clement. I know a lot of those are just coming in. It's just insane proof. So
yeah,
that's interesting.
Actually, one of my first jobs with them was to launch the Rum Damoiseau 110 proof.
Okay.
Which, is still one of my favorite spirits that has ever existed, even though it's no longer with that company and it doesn't really have a footprint in New York, in America anymore. And it's just a really difficult rum in general, but it was so funky and cool. I miss it.
That's awesome. I think, and I won't sidetrack this too much. The very first Rem Clement experience I had was like a 68% single cast for K&L wines. And I was like, oh, I'll try this agricole stuff. And I got it. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I got on the bus at the wrong stop. I should have gotten on a few stops earlier, but I guess I got on a little bit intense.
Yeah, I actually think I had that cask. I think I remember when they bought that. I love the single barrel stuff from them.
I took samples. Hopefully no one from the FAA is listening, but I was going on a trip to Hawaii and it came in like the day before I left. So I enjoyed some samples of that on the airplane. And I was like, when I got off the plane, I was just kind of like,
everything's
5 hours of drinking Rum Clement. Yeah, but it was awesome.
Oh.
Yeah, this rye is nice. I haven't had this batch before. It's and so this is a blend, you said, clearly.
Yeah, so the base of this is the 95.5 Indiana rye, and then there's a pretty significant amount of the 14-year-old Canadian rye, and then 6 and 7-year-old 100% malted Polish rye.
Okay.
Wow. The Indiana is actually 2 different lots, even though they're the same mash bill. One lot of 4-year-old barrels that they were just stinging, and so we needed to get them out of wood as soon as we could. They were perfect to us. Okay. And then a lot of 7-year-old barrels that we also really loved were a little bit more of like the standard, what you'd expect from that distillery and that mash bill. And actually, if you look through our single barrel offerings, there were 6, maybe 8 of the 4-year-olds that were just so tasty that we did them as single barrels. Nice. They're all MG01 to MG08. And pretty much everyone who asked to taste blind and gave us permission to give them a 4-year-old maybe picked the 4-year-old. Like,
okay.
I think we released 20-something 7-year-olds and 8 4-year-olds, and the 4-year-olds all sold first if people were willing to taste them blind because they were just so special. Yeah.
It's amazing how that works.
Yeah, it's not that it's always better, but we were so careful about those 8 barrels that we picked. And in fact, the first one, MG01, we did in what we call our Joe's playlist, which is single barrel and private releases that Joe feels are like really good examples of the different projects we're doing. I don't want to say they're his favorites. It's more like we want to make one really easily available to anyone, not as store picks. And MG01 we named Genesis because the barrel was so good. It actually inspired the concept of doing Joe's playlist. Cool. So there's this rye available. I think it might be sold out now, but it's called Joe's Playlist Genesis. And because it was a 4-year-old rye barrel that was like, well, I guess we're doing our own single barrels now because no one gets this one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really like this. It's nice to see like that. It has a lot of fruity character, but that doesn't completely obfuscate any of the barrel character, which is, usually either get like a fruity rye or you get like a super clove heavy rye or you get like a barrel driven rye.
Mm. Yeah.
And I get a lot of the fruit in the barrel, which is really nice.
Yeah, I like how deep this one goes too.
Drinks really well for the proof.
I find that on the palate, the American rye shines a lot, but on the nose, you get that like green apple and that like white flower.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but I started noticing like a week or 2 ago, I smelled fondant, the frosting.
Sure.
I was like frosting too. Yeah.
I was like, that's the note. And I was thinking of this in a couple other whiskeys that I've gotten it in. I'm like, I never thought of fondant before. But now it's like, once I noticed it, that's like all I noticed. There's got to be some Kojner that is like smells away and it reminds me of fondant. And now
I think you're totally right there. Cause I get green apple, I get buttercream, and I get like a really, not bold, but like really meaty kind of sake note, which is really nice.
Yeah. I like how this one brings in a good layer of just darker flavor too, especially on the nose for me. I don't get as much of like a green apple. It started out with some good fruit, just like a light kick of that rye spice, almost towards the like herbal dill side. But then, man, it really comes right back around to a big, heavy, sweet.
Yeah.
It started out as like a caramel type of thing, and it just has worked its way right up to. I was gonna say vanilla frosting. I wasn't gonna go quite into buttercream, but for me, it was like a vanilla frosting in there that I really dig.
I would say cream cheese frosting, but that's something I really get in like agave spirits, like that lactic, funky.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this really cool combination of like butyric acid, but not enough to smell like vomit, and lactic acid, but not enough to smell like milk, and it comes across as like cream cheesy.
Yeah,
I get it in mezcal.
It somehow smells creamy.
But then I also sometimes get it in like either in like good young distillate or in like really like not really old, but like medium age oaky Isla.
I can see that.
This like kind of meaty blue cheesy thing.
I noticed that Bricklati always screams that meaty lactic blue cheesy almost at any age, but really after like 10 years, it's always there for me. Yeah, auditor. Yeah. Wow. That was
we're
good.
Sharing a brain right now.
Yeah, this is really nice.
Yeah, I dig that. I'd like to throw that in Manhattan with some of the black walnut bitters too. Let that run around and see what happens in a glass.
We found we really like doing cocktails with this that have like a sipping bitter in them.
Okay.
So like an Amaro or even like a more robust fortified wine. Manhattan, but like sort of like beefed up Manhattans a little bit and with more of the bitter. Just because it actually is pretty high proof, so it holds itself in a 1-to-1 in a way that some other whiskeys don't.
Yeah, I bet this would go really good with like Bruto or something. I'll have to try that. Ooh, that's an idea.
There's a Amaro producer in Brooklyn that we're actually doing some Amaro finishes on whiskey with called St. Agrestis.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to sound like I'm just doing a plug for them. I'm not just doing a plug for them. I actually really like this particular rye with that particular Amaro together. But we also love working with them, so I guess I am doing a plug a little bit.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll allow it. We'll allow it.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll have to give that a shot. It's weird. We actually one of the Discords I'm in has had like this really radical tiny group of like just Amaro fanatics. We're like, yeah, you're weird, but we like it. So like, why don't you stick around? And they're like, I mean, I even figured out they're like, hey, have you had this range of Amaro from Milwaukee, Wisconsin? And I was like, I didn't know we made Amaro in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but it turns out we do. So I'll have to get down there and try some of it one of these days.
I find Amaro and gin are really cool categories in that no place is unable to make them well.
Yeah.
And you can decide whether you want it to be all about you and your recipe, or you want to try to have it be of the place you're in one way or another.
Yeah.
But you can go almost anywhere and find a place that's making it locally, and it might be great. It might be terrible, but it might be great. Whereas a lot of aged spirits or a lot of like very base grain or base fruit spirits, like you have to be in the place that it grows well, or the place that it ages well, or the place that things are available. But Amaro and gin kind of like, you can make a Nordic-y Amaro. You can make like an Amaro that is flavored with something in the South. Like you can make smoky. There's just like so many options. Anyway.
No, it's funny you mentioned that because I mean, I write a ton about whiskey, but also write a ton about gin. Like right now I'm in the middle of this writing series called the Gin Invitational, and I'm doing like 77 gins from across America, and I'm on day like 48 or something. And like, that's my favorite thing about gin. That's why I started doing it. Like as long as you're a good producer, the odds are you can make a good gin first off, and that's kind of what I judge whiskey. Like, all right, like I get it. Your whiskey's not ready, but like, so let's talk about your gin. Are you making gin? Like what's going on? What's special about it? Is it good? Et cetera, et cetera. And there's so many just like crazy gins from the middle of nowhere in America. And some of them are fantastic. I mean, some of them are terrible, but some of them are just like mind blowing. And I'm like, you're doing what? And you're doing it where? Like, okay, I think is interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to move on to bourbon?
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, while you guys start getting that staged, if you want to get your bourbon poured or set up or whatever it is that you need to do, Hokie wanted to ask a question to Will. Wanted
Sure.
to know, with the Infinity Barrel project, what release do you think has had the most impact on overall flavor profile?
Oh, that is a good put me on the spot question.
Oh, I'm sure got 4 more ready. So
He'll do that to you.
Yeah, no,
that's a
I'm
good
glad.
guy.
I love this. Honestly, and I will answer the question, but best thing for me is to get questions that I have to think about for a minute, because it means I'll have it on deck for the next time, and it also means that people are thinking about our brand the way we want them to. I have not committed to memory the bottling dates of all of the releases of Infinite Barrel, even though there's a few that I really like that I have committed to memory. And so I'm going to have to give you a general season with the answer. The second release that we did, which was probably March 2018, was not the biggest jump in terms of flavor profile, but it was the moment that we knew it wasn't going to be a drop in the bucket product. And so we invested in, there was a lot more older whiskey in the second release than anything else. And by a lot more, it's really only 10% going in, but it was when we were like, okay, we're going to invest in the products we need for this. And we're going to like really do the thing that we said we were going to do in a big way. And so it's not that it's most obvious, but the slight difference between the first and the second is this like oxidative whiskey difference, which is harder to notice, but I think actually speaks to the ingredients really well. Another favorite of mine is the Halloween release, not because it was particularly different in any way, but because we Easter egged a pumpkin onto it. And it's the only time the front label has been different on the Infinite Barrel project.
Oh, I like that.
I like it.
Also, and we were talking about weird back of house stuff earlier, and you guys gave me permission to be bureaucratically nerdy. In our consolidation warehouse, the Infinite Barrel project only has one item code, and so we're not able to know which release we're shipping when a distributor buys it, except for Infinite Barrel Halloween. We separated because we knew we might need to send someone the Halloween release at some point. And so we actually still do it occasionally, where we saved some and a distributor will put in a purchase order for 20 cases or 100 cases or whatever it is, and they'll get one case of Halloween randomly and we won't tell them. But like we're able to control that just because it's like a fun thing. The most recent bottling, which has not made it onto very many shelves yet, so it would probably be like the August or September 2020, has some we've now been aging the scotch that's in it in our facility for quite a while, and it has changed a little bit. And so I think it's a little more scotch forward, but in this like meaty Kentucky aging way. And all of these are like really small, minute differences, but those are probably the ones that I've noticed and been intrigued by and wanted to taste through. But thank you for that question. I'm sure there's someone from the sales team listening to this too, and they're gonna have a million follow-ups for me or their own opinion.
That's really funny. Is it just like an H appended to the SKU or something like for Halloween?
It actually it's Halloween appended to the SKU.
Okay, I was close.
Yeah,
I was only like 9 letters off.
No, it's funny.
That's super funny.
Yeah, it's we do that occasionally just because we like before the fact realize like, oh, we might want to do this and we can't change it after we get it into this warehouse. There's certain things that are skewed, or the whiskey is split skew because it is compliant differently in different places.
Yeah.
So like until pretty recently, Missouri, you couldn't do a alcohol by volume adjustment on the cola when you registered things there. And so with Dovetail, we had to have a SKU that was like the proof that we had gone through all of the bureaucracy to be compliant in Missouri. And so we had to save some of it. So we had Dovetail and Dovetail Missouri for a little while.
That's interesting.
And the Dovetail Missouri was the same thing, but it was just being released at different rates. It was like we had to save the end of the one batch as we released the other one as Missouri caught up compliance wise. And that's just like, those are two examples of like lessons we've learned being a 15-person company with 1 million products in almost every state.
Seriously.
But it's great. It's like a puzzle for me, which is real fun. I just poured Bourbon Batch 24. If you guys,
Perfect.
Yeah, I just poured it as well.
I don't want to rush this, by the way. I just feel like after we've had 2 or 3 of these, like conversation gets real fun.
Yeah. And that's kind of like how we do it too. Like we'll get through these. I mean, we're taking our time. Life's going good, and then we can hang around and finish them off and chat about life and stuff.
See how many more questions come through from.
Then we don't go like 38 minutes between tastings.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is very different. I don't know if it's a power suggestion, but like this smells like pie to me. Not quite pumpkin pie, but like a nutmeg praline, kind of like an amaretto. Yummy.
So 24 was a really cool batch for us. We have sort of 3 different methods of blending that we do for the bourbon, for everything, but especially for the bourbon batches. The first, which 24 is an example of, which is how we really originally did things, is called a contrast blend for us, and it's when the vast majority of the makeup by volume, so like 70-80%, is a set of barrels that was all reasonably similar, at least in the way they were raised. So similar age, similar rickhouse placement, similar mash bill, if not the same mash bill. And then we take what we love about that set and we blend things in that are totally in contrast to them, not with the idea that those contrast barrels will be recognizable in the blend, but that they layer complexity into it that you would never have found otherwise. So it's like 80% of one thing and then 20% of a variety of very different things.
Oh,
and the base of Bourbon 24 is this 9-year-old high rye bourbon that Trip and Joe love. It's pretty much exactly the same recipe as batches 5 and 6, but a little older. And all of the other blending into 24, the Indiana component, the Kentucky component, the 13-year-old component, the 15-year-old, which is this component that we call the secret sauce or the special sauce, because it's barrels that had very low proof exits that are like so delicious and easy to drink, but because of that, almost one-dimensional. We vat them and we use it to like round out blends that we like the flavor profile of, but are not palatable at cask strength. But
that's a good
like
idea.
It's like the most expensive water you can have. It's like the oldest whiskey is the afterthought in a lot of our blends, and it's not an afterthought that it's not important, but it's like we try to get the flavor exactly where we want it, and then we use the secret sauce to like touch up the texture and the mouthfeel and the like palatability and the separation of flavors. And it's only recently that we were like, you know what, let's just tell everyone about the secret sauce. Like it's in almost every one of our bourbon blends now. That it like,
okay,
because it's no secret. It's like you blend in a little bit of 15-year-old bourbon, it's going to make things taste better. But it's not so great by itself because it just doesn't have the structure that you need. People don't want easy bourbon. Like people want bourbon that they fight with a little bit, and so it's too easy. But anyway, 24 was really special to us because of it was basically like taking the set of barrels we loved and then just souping it up with little bits of other things we liked. You were saying there's like a marzipan note to this.
Yeah, perhaps.
And that is, I'm not going to say like chemically, but to me that note comes from old Indiana bourbon.
Yeah.
But it does not have the structure of old Indiana bourbon at all. It doesn't have the flavor profile, but it has that one note to me that I was like, that was a contrast blended into it. And I think about like some of our older batches that were more Indiana driven, like batch 10 or even like batch 22, which was a little younger, but had a lot of Indiana in it. And that it's like that marzipan is all over those batches. But
okay.
But here it's like you get it for a minute.
I like to get it on the nose for this. And then once you drink it on the palate, it's very different. But like that nose for me has always been enticing. And that's one of the things that brought me to sherried Scotch initially was that nutty sweetness, that almost amaretto marzipan that you get from some of those drier sherries like a Fino or something. So it's like fun to get that note in a bourbon and be like, oh man, it's there. And then it's nice that on the palate, it does have a lot of structure, which is good blending, in my opinion. Like, it's very fun.
Yeah, you get that
There's a lot
age
to
in there.
unpack.
Yeah, there's a set of barrels that they're like 10 and 11 now that are way too oaky to be their own whiskey. And we use them as structural component in a lot of things.
I can see that. I think that's wise too.
If you remember batch 8, which we called the Big Oaky Unicorn, that was our nickname for it. And batch 8 was an 8-year-old at 132 proof.
Okay.
2 years later, those barrels are even oakier. They've actually lost a little proof, but they're at the point where they're blending components now. They're past their prime for being themselves.
Mm-hmm.
There was a few releases. If anyone's ever had a single barrel from us that starts with a T, the 4-digit code is a T. Those are barrels from that set, and I think there were like 10 of them.
Interesting.
Like a little softer, and so we put them out as single barrels. And they were a tough sell because they're the same price as the 14-year-olds, and and they're the same distillery. They're just they came out a little differently, and they were still showing really well, so we wanted to get them out of wood, and instead of losing them in a blend, we did a series of single barrels.
Now that brings me to an interesting point. I don't know if you guys have considered this, but it's very popular in like cognac and brandy and Armagnac to arrest the aging process by tanking, whether it's a demijohn or something else. Have you guys considered doing that? Like, holy shit, this is at its prime. Maybe we don't want it to just become a blending component. Like, have you guys considered tanking any of your barrels?
Yeah, I mean, so we tanked the secret sauce.
Okay.
And we tank the ingredients for Dovetail quite a bit. And a lot of times what we will do is blend a lot of a component, and not all of it will be used in the batch we're working on then, and we will go back and use it to something else, or occasionally we'll rebarrel it as well. Okay. But so the answer is like yes, but not exactly, because a lot of the Armagnac, and I think Calvados is especially notorious for at least like putting it in foudres, for like big neutral oak. A lot of, we won't do it for no reason, but a lot of times we will vat more of an ingredient than we need, and then it'll stay in tank after that.
Okay.
And then there's certain situations like the MG series, the 4-year-old Indiana Rise, and the T series, the 10-year-old bourbons, that there's just things that are showing well, and we know another year in wood is not going to do them any favors. And so we've also started using, so we use the Dunn barrels for Dovetail, which we'll get to in a second, and we use them for Dovetail once and sometimes twice, but after we've used them twice, we just have these like beautiful neutral French oak barrels because they've had Cabernet and then 2 distillates in them. And so we do a lot of racking into those because they still have a little bit of, like, the French oak allows things to oxidize really well. Sometimes there's a little bit of more oak in it, but they aren't imparting a ton of flavor, and they're so tight and easy to move around, and they look so good, and they stack so well. They're just like a $1,200 French oak barrel is on a different level than a like sort of commodity bourbon barrel. Not that bourbon barrels aren't great, but just as a container, they're beautiful.
Certainly.
And so as Dovetail has gotten more and more popular, and we're doing more and more finishing in the Dunn barrels, we just have more Dunn barrels, which is great because I don't want to speak for Joe and Tripp because we are a bourbon rye company at heart. We use a lot of those barrels and we love them. But like in my head, it's like I would love to be storing things in just like neutral French oak all the time. That sounds fantastic. Like just the way that the distillery would look, you know?
Well, I think
too, Legos.
Yeah, that makes me happy to hear, because that means, at least to me, that you guys have the ultimate blending tools available. You know, you're not trying to just, all right, these casks are in prime, these casks are in prime, all right, blend them, or, you know, save these casks. I think that's super valuable to have on hand.
Yeah, we're really
a French oak fan.
Lucky that we have so many product lines now, and also so much flexibility about what we're using, that when we find sets of barrels that we like, the goal is to maximize them, but it's also to use them in as many ways that they can be used as possible if they're really great, because we want to attribute those things we love into positive ingredients into a lot of the projects we're working on. And so we'll take something and we'll leave some alone. We'll vat some, we'll release some as single barrels. Some will be released in a bourbon batch if they're bourbon, and others will be the bourbon component in something else. we do a lot of sorting, but also because of that, we're able to like just take bigger lots at the same time because we have a lot of different homes for them, and because we're not going anywhere, and we all the time, not so much anymore, but for many years, we would get asked like, when are you going to run out of old bourbon kind of question. Yeah. And it's like, the answer is like, we have more old bourbon now than we've ever had.
Okay.
We, for the most part, have a policy that like, we want to end every quarter or every half year or every year with more robust stocks than we started. And so it's not replacing with younger necessarily, or it's not using a lot of what we have as it ages. Being careful about what we pull from, and then being like betting on ourselves with what we're buying. I see a bunch of questions.
Yes, actually, you answered a good chunk of this question already. It's mostly about your barrel sourcing, and when you guys are going to bring in barrels from various places, do you go looking for something where you say, this is the profile we want, and we think this place will have it, let's sample a bunch of their stock? Or how do you go about the process of bringing in barrels to then create these blends with?
So every situation ends up being a little different. We are so fortunate in that we're able to think about a year out and 2 years out and 3 years out and 5 years out when we're making decisions. And we are really confident in our ability to let things that are really good be really good, and use things that are not complete as components and things that to maximize what they have that's good about them. And so, yes, there are moments that we are going out and looking for things because we either want to make more of a type of flavor profile that we've used before, or there's just something we know we love. So, for instance, the high rye component in Bourbon 24, I don't want to speak for Joe, but I'm like 99% sure that if he could find thousands and thousands and thousands of barrels that tasted that way, he would find a way to buy them, because it's like batch 5 and 6 were awesome. Batch 24 is awesome. The single barrels we've done from them were awesome. We know that they're good at 6 years. We know that they're good at 9 years. We've had a little bit of them at 11 years, and like they're still doing well. And we also are really confident in our ability to notice that something's getting too oaky and like pull it out. It's like, it's an ingredient that we love and an ingredient that we know how to work with really well. So yeah, we definitely go out and look for that type of thing. But then there's so many things where it's like, something cool becomes available and we want it, and we'll figure out what to do with it at some point. Either right away or down the road. And then also, like, the climate of what people are looking for changes a little bit, and we want to be prepared for all of that. And so I don't have an exact answer to that, because it's just different every time.
No, that's good. I think you touched on a lot of it too I hadn't even asked the question yet, and you were already talking about the different barrels, the different profiles and things like that. I think it wraps it up pretty good for them too.
Yeah, I think it's we are, I hope politely, but very confident in being good at what we do, and then also being like keeping our head down and knowing that we can always get better at it. Yeah. And so we want to give ourselves the biggest spice box we can to make the most interesting things we can. And so you have to balance that with the easy acquisitions and the acquisitions that are going to help you make your portfolio more interesting. And I think that's why, like, we pushed really hard into crazy rum, and recently we pushed really hard into finishes that people hadn't even heard of. Yep. When Joe was talking to me and Nick, it was like, what are the ones we're going to do that are not going to be difficult to digest intellectually, and what are the ones that you have always wanted to see a whiskey company do? And we like sat down, and like Nick is the barrel manager, right? So like Nick is tasting all these all the time, and it's like, okay, like Oloroso sherry is delicious all the time. PX sherry, delicious all the time. I'm a Madeira nerd, so it's like, okay, if we're gonna do Madeira, let's do varietal specific Madeira. Let's do Malmsey Madeira. Let's do Cercial Madeira. let's do all that. Let's try to get a Ratafia to Champagne barrel. Like, why not, right? Because Ratafia de Champagne is delicious. It's like fancy Pinot de Charente, which is fancy fortified wine with cognac in it. So like, so we did it and it came out great. Or like we did we did one apricot brandy finish in the first set of private release whiskeys, and we didn't think anyone was going to want all of the apricot brandy finish. We didn't think that any one store was going to say, yeah, we would love 180 bottles of $110 apricot brandy finished Kentucky whiskey. And actually it was like the first one to go. And awesome. So then we're like, okay, well now we know we can do a project where we're going to do like 10 apricot brandy finishes. So we're slowly releasing the other ones. But it was only because we needed to challenge ourselves with that once. And then it I don't want to say it like randomly turned out well. Like we were really careful about tasting it and blending towards it. But we needed to balance that program between the things we knew that would work, like a sherry finished whiskey, which is objectively just delicious whiskey most of the time. And then a bunch of things that no one had done before, but we tested with oak chips and we felt would be good. And so we committed to putting the whiskey in the barrel.
Man, that's cool. Yeah, it's cool to see that level of experimentation because, I mean, even now it's hard to find that. In whiskey producers in America know that the market's there, and some of them have started to get bold. Like I always like to reference Hotel Tango does a wild fermented rum that I think is super cool, just because like no one else has been ballsy enough to do it. So it's kind of cool to see. I mean, I can't think of many Amaro finish. I mean, I've had like Two James is doing Dr. Bird finish in vermouth and different Amaro casks, which is super cool, but that's rum, that's not whiskey. So it's cool to see you guys picking that up. Have you, of those, do you have a very specific favorite? Like, was there one that you were pulling for? Like we got to just at least do one of this, whether it was, something funky or is that mostly up to, are you guys kind of picking those as a team?
We picked them as a team. The blending production team from a like product, conceiving of products and executing product standpoint, even though there's some other really great people that work in the distillery that like move things that I can't move and do work day in and day out. So I don't want to not give them credit for that. But Tripp, who is a chemical engineer, works for Brown-Forman, worked for Jefferson's, is blended with Joe even before I was working for the company. Really does a lot of the execution of like which whiskeys go into which blend and whatnot. Joe does the blending and also signs off on everything. So I was actually just doing an interview pretty recently. Actually, it's with our importer in Australia, who we just launched in Australia, and our company is one of, if not the biggest companies in America, I think, that still has a single person whose vision and palate is not letting anything out the door unless they sign off on it. And we have so many things going on, but nothing from a whiskey standpoint, from a color of label standpoint, from a, like, how are we going to talk about this on the website? Like, what are we going to ask for from these distributors? All of that is like Joe's vision still is the umbrella over all of it. And because of that, there's a cohesiveness to an otherwise completely random set of whiskeys. And I hope that we're able to maintain that for a long time. But I think that when you have a venture capitalist fund owned brand, you can't do that because you need to turn the profit really quickly or because you have a runway. And when you have a brand that is fitting into a portfolio with many other things, they have to stay in their lane because they have, and we don't have to deal with, we have like an owner and founder who is like deeply personally invested in his own pride about the products. We are a company that is like profitable and careful about the money we're spending and betting on ourselves a lot. And so when we do something, it's because we want to do it and we feel like it'll be successful. And we're like big enough to have the ingredients to do all of this stuff now. And because of that, Joe being on the blending team, but Joe being on like every team that exists amongst the 15 of us is I think like keeps us all in focus quite a bit. So then Nick, who's the single barrel manager, who was the beverage director of Butchertown Grocery in Louisville before she worked for us, is just like, has such a good palate, is so organized, is tasting all the time. And like, she knows what we have everywhere all the time, no matter what. And like me, came from a job that was not just whiskey, and so like has a little bit more of a consumer perspective on it.
Sure.
And they do a lot of the blending. They all live in Kentucky. I don't live in Kentucky. I get to do the like, what if we did this part of the blending team all the time? Or they'll send me samples that are blind and say, what's your favorite? Like I get to do just the fun, but not the hard part of blending. And I think everyone keeps each other in check because we all come from really different places. We all have different ways that we think about it. I can suggest, or Nick can suggest, all sorts of crazy finishes to Joe, and Tripp's not going to let us do it unless he thinks it'll work, and Joe's not going to let it out the door unless he approves of it. And so it's like a checks and balances kind of situation.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What do you say? We have plenty of time here, but should we dive into the Dovetail?
Yeah,
let's do that.
This is I don't know if Whiskey Cam is up or not. This is
no Whiskey Cam had to go to bed. Had a little bit too much. A little too much.
We took it out. Yeah, 122.9 proof. This is Barrel Dovetail. Whiskey finished in rum, port, and Dunn Vineyard Cabernet barrels. Hot diggity.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, so when we first put Dovetail together, we thought it was going to be like a nerdy one-off that no one knew about. It would slowly sell out, and then a couple years later, it would be like on auction sites because we only did it once.
Okay.
That's a hell of an entry strategy.
Yeah, the vision for Dovetail was make a thing that no one will notice, whiskey nerds will love it, and in a couple years, we'll like dunk on it a little bit. And we released it in the middle of December, which is the worst time to release a new product because no one wants to talk to you about it. It was 600 cases and it sold out in 2 weeks.
Holy shit.
And so we scrambled and we were like, okay, well, there were 3 ingredients in this. We can't make it the same exactly, but we can do the process again. And maybe Dovetail's like Infinite Barrel. It's always around. And we had to do a lot of thinking about like, it's not a batch because it's not starting from scratch and maximizing different sets of barrels. It's deliberately making 3 ingredients and then blending them together. But so deep to the core of the way we feel about making whiskey is you do not have a target of the same thing every time. You have a target of what's the best thing you can make at that moment. And so we had some long, contentious meetings about like, is Dovetail the same every time? How the same is it? Is it the same proof? Is it the same recipe? Is it always the same 3 things? Do we change one of the finishes? What we decided on is we will make these 3 component whiskeys constantly, and as needed, we will blend them to taste to make the best combination of the 3 whiskeys we can, no matter what. And we got in touch with Dunn, who had sort of volunteered to give us barrels because they like whiskey and they thought it was cool. And Mike Dunn, we thought we were like, we'll buy them. Like, please, can we keep doing it? He was like, just send me more whiskey. I just want more whiskey. We were like, how much? And he was like, I'll tell you when there's enough, but there's never enough whiskey. And to this day, when anyone that works for Dunn wants whiskey from our company, they call us and we send them whiskey. And when we need barrels, we pick them up. And there's like, there's no buying any of it. And I would hope everyone that works for Dunn knows that they can have as much whiskey as they want, and we still are really honored to be partners of theirs.
Very cool.
And we use it for Dovetail, but we also do some of the private releases are finished in Dunn now, and actually we have a rum that's finished in Dunn too.
Okay.
Just because we love working with them and we love the barrel so much.
Sounds like I need a new job.
Yeah.
At Dunn specifically, very specifically at Dunn.
You guys want to run an interview whiskey show? I'm sure you get plenty of samples.
Yeah, 1 or 2.
We stay busy. Man, this is wild. So if I was the barrel Dovetail geek who wanted to get involved with tracking these, is this like a yearly thing? Like, do I look for a 2019 bottle code to track down a specific batch?
Nope. So UPC is always the same. We don't make it easy on you, is the answer.
Excellent.
UPC is always the same, and we have very little control over which we're sending to people unless there's a compliance issue about it.
Okay.
If you guys don't have a 750, you have sample flask, so you can't see it. But on the label, and you're not going to be able to see what I'm talking about, but you see how there's a line between where the Dovetail is and the yellow part where it explains what it is? It's called a
stitch
we
work.
call that a spline, yeah. And it's a dovetail joint. It was designed that way. And all the way to the right on that spline, one of the little pieces of wood is a number.
Jesus Christ.
I like how fucking clever you guys are with these things, your pumpkins and your splines.
And so that is which vatting of it was. And so we are working on the 7th vatting right now.
Okay.
The proof also changes, and so you can kind of all the information is not available on our website, so as to avoid getting our distributors in trouble about which vatting they have.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone is really interested, we like talking to people that want more information than our website gives them, even though our website is pretty deep.
It's pretty deep as it is, yeah.
And so the contact at barrelbourbon.com. Also, I do not say this often, but it seems like you have a very engaged viewer base. So I'm Will at barrelbourbon.com if you really want to get me directly, although you'll get a better answer at contact at barrelbourbon.com.
Okay.
Because it's going to come from me anyway, but someone else is going to make sure I answer it.
Okay.
Anyone who has any questions about it, I can't really help source all of them, but I can keep an eye out. And we want to know who wants these things from us, even if we can't deliver. And if we can't deliver, we'll apologize in the email. We'll say, like, this is a state that still has some old stuff. This is a store we know has some old stuff, but that's the best we can do.
Yeah, this is a good point from Hokie. Like, I can't wait in the year 2021 to like steam peel off one of these labels and invert it and then get the QR code off the back and then like decode that.
Yeah, put it in some water in the microwave and see what color the dye it leaches out. If it's red, then you know it was vatted on this day.
Yeah. Find out that there's like a reference to like National Treasure in there and skip to 31 minutes and 29 seconds in, and then like
a idea of mine that got shot down for good reasons was to make a small batch called Honey Hole and allocate it only to like middle of nowhere stores and not tell anyone.
I like it.
I think that's a great idea. I mean,
it's a good idea until you think about the logistics of trying to do that and the enemies of important retailers you will make, and the generally there's no win involved in it, just work, and it's a bad idea.
That makes sense.
About it. But it would be fun, yeah. If we were like a not-for-profit supporting our own amusement, it would be a fun project to do.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I always joke, like, I would love for just like some 7-Eleven in Albuquerque to get cases of, I don't know, whatever the hot product is this year, whether it's Pappy or something else. I think that'd just be the funniest thing for some guy in Albuquerque to walk into 7-Eleven and be like, Van Winkle 20 year, like next to the Slurpee machine. Like,
what in the hell? How do they have 40 bottles of it?
We'd get along pretty well.
I want to get back to the Dovetail, but also what's cool is that happens. It just doesn't happen with Van Winkle. It happens with other cool things that, like, one of the best Dusties to find in my mind is pre-2003 Johnny Walker Green. Oh, yeah. Because that's just one of the most delicious whiskeys put together. Like, old Johnny Walker Green was just like, the whiskeys that went into it were so fantastic. It was a vatted malt. There was no neutral grain. It was so good. And you find old Johnny Walker Green all the time from someone who got talked into buying like 50 cases of it and had no place having that much Johnny Walker Green. But you find it at like 7-Eleven. Like, no one that attracts whiskey buyers has that left. But it totally exists, You're totally right. Like, I bought more than a little bit of, like, I don't know, some of the really old ancient age or some of the really old rare breed and stuff like that, like pre-2000 even, from this little gas station that, moved 100 cases of a Wisconsin wine, and right next to it was bourbon that was just like so caked in dust. Yeah. Because like and it wasn't in a great neighborhood. Like, I get that. Like, that's half the appeal, right? Like, I felt a little bit like dangerous going in there because I didn't belong, but like they had the juice, Right.
So one of our viewers here, Dustin, wants to know if you guys are coming to Ohio or if that's in the works.
Yes. So we had plans to submit to Ohio second quarter this year and then third quarter this year, but the way that you present is very different amidst COVID there. And so we didn't feel that we would get approved, and you get blackballed if you get rejected there. And so we had to put it on hold. Our batch system for the bourbon doesn't work with the way that Ohio does approvals, because the NABC code and the COLA, sorry to throw jargon out there, but basically like the national code you get for control states and the approval you get to label your product change batch to batch with the bourbon for us, but not with Dovetail. And when we first looked at going into Ohio, we were not able to get a listing just for barrel bourbon. We would have had to do it for a specific batch, which means when the batch goes out of stock from us, it looks like we're not selling anything else in Ohio, and our statistics would not look good. And so we've had to do some like creative how to deal with submitting to Ohio. I know we talked before we went on air about how Wisconsin's the last state that we're not in for no reason, because there's no good reason. We just haven't entered Wisconsin yet. Ohio is one of the couple states that we're not in for a good reason, but we'll be there pretty soon because it's a wonderful whiskey market. There's so many people that love whiskey there. It's so close to where we are, and we now have the team to support complicated control state situations. We just relaunched in Michigan recently, and it's been wonderful. And so Ohio will be early next year, I think.
Well, I'll have to start squeaky wheeling, gets the grease for Wisconsin, because I can't speak for my countrymen who are up to their eyeballs in Korbel brandy, but I sure would love for you guys to be here.
We will absolutely be there. I promise.
I'll have to lean on some people. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Because it's weird. I don't think I've spent more money on a brand that isn't even sold in my state than I have on barrel bourbon. Or sorry, barrel craft spirits.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Now that I think about it, yeah. Like usually I can get like a little bit and I'm like, all right, give me the rest. But yeah, it's been an import only operation for me here in Wisconsin.
Well, hopefully that'll be over soon.
Yeah.
So anyway, Dovetail. So we talked about the done component. The other two components are both 14-year-old bourbon finished separately in blackstrap molasses rum casks and late bottle vintage port pipes. And they were designed actually to tease flavors out of the Cabernet finish that weren't apparent in the same way. So it's like we want that like really jammy, fruity port-esque quality that you get in like Napa Cab. And then we also wanted the like dusty, dark fruit, earthy, tar-driven, left bank Cabernet difficult quality that you get out of really good Cab as well. And we achieved that by finishing bourbon in blackstrap molasses rum. And so the hope was that it's like we blended into making the done finish even more intense and exciting than it would have been otherwise. But I think what happened with Dovetail that I don't want to say was by design, but like once we realized what we were doing, we leaned into it more, is that the structure of the whiskey, the way it feels in your mouth, the like way it reads is so American. It's like a bourbon shell, but the flavor profile is nothing like bourbon. And so
it's wild as hell.
And so it feels like an American whiskey. It does not, it's not nearly as thin or abrasive as Canadian whiskey or Scotch, or even it's not as leathery as Irish whiskey. It has that like sweetness and that roundness of bourbon, but without the flavor profile being totally driven by corn and American oak. There's like all sorts of other stuff going on too.
This is really interesting. I understand that you may not be able to disclose. Can you say who the rum was from, or is that
so it's a blackstrap molasses rum produced in Barbados. Okay. But my understanding is it is not a rum that has a brand. It's a rum that's only used in blends.
Okay. That gives me what I need.
Yeah.
Yum.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's very like
Christmas. That's
like,
decadent.
Yeah,
it's an opulent whiskey.
Yeah, certainly. That's a great descriptor for it.
There's this cool thing that happens with Dovetail and a couple other really wonderful spirits around the world that they're very high proof, but because it has finishing that was fermented and not distilled in terms of the Cabernet and the port, there's still the presence of actual acid, which like couldn't make it through distillation in the finishing.
Yeah.
And then the blackstrap molasses rum and the port and also the French oak that would never saw a distillate have sugar present in them. And so there's an acid sugar balance that happens in this. Acid sugar balance is, if they are in balance and done well, they don't taste sweet, they don't taste acidic, and they are wonderfully distracting to alcohol. If you think about like really good wine at higher proofs, like the really well-made New World wines that are 14, 15%, don't read that way because they're acidic enough and they're sweet enough. Or really wonderful off-dry German wines don't read as really sweet because they have so much acid, they balance it out. Dovetail, to me, it's like you get all of the flavor and power that you get from like an 122, 123, 125 proof whiskey, but because you have that acid sugar balance, you don't get the difficult part of it. It's just like a really easy whiskey to drink. It's such a mouth-filling and flavorful whiskey, but like it's not a killer. It's just like, it's like the Terry Crews of whiskey. I've never said that before, but that's a shtick now. I'm gonna use that.
No, that's
I like that.
That's staying forever. That's fucking fantastic. Yep, that's gonna have to stay. I mean, that's a great descriptor for it, though. I mean, the Terry Crews of whiskey.
I even caught like a little bit of like a toasted marshmallow there too.
Yeah, this is,
man. There's enough going on there that it's a thinker too. I mean, I guess you probably wouldn't want to get too involved with drinking a whole ton of those at once, being in 126 and change.
122, yeah.
So our company, one of our like internal favorite ways to drink is a Dovetail neat and a like more restrained IPA next to it. So like not either
like a
session or like a harpoon or even like one of the more modern like hazy IPAs, but not one of the ones that's trying to kick your ass. One of the ones that like has some lactose in it and like is actually a little softer. Like
sure.
Eva, our Northeastern brand development manager's fiance, is the sales manager for Sloop in New York, which is like this really fast growing brewery, and they make beautiful IPAs, and the like Dovetail and Sloop combo we do all the time. And then Joe and his wife Janet both really like IPAs, and you wouldn't think it would go well, but something about the like really expensive Boilermaker of Dovetail neat and IPA is like it's like how we like, I don't know,
awesome.
Take our shoes off as a company when we're together.
That's like the quintessential enthusiast pairing. Like, what should I supplement my expensive hard liquor with? Like craft beer.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Admittedly, I'm like, we usually drink wine with dinner. So I'm usually like, all right, what spirit when I'm warming up for the night? Like what spirit pairs well with this like Viognier or something like, and I was like, do people do this? Like, am I just like off here in left field, like looking like an idiot being like Chablis and I don't know, peated Scotch or something. But
I am going to resist the temptation of going into this conversation with you because I'm here as a representative for my wonderful employer. But off air, we can talk about it all you want because it's like my very poorly dirty professional secret that in my private life I really love talking about and drinking wine. And so, and I think you find that in the liquor industry all the time. It's like no one wants to only deal with their own category when they're not working, but everyone is so used to being obsessive about things that they have like stuff that they're really into. I think it's a little bit how like mezcal became the like love of the alcohol industry for a little while, because it's like it wasn't popular and it was interesting. So all the people that were pouring whiskey all the time or pouring wine all the time just like wanted the weird thing that they couldn't get and got really into mezcal. And then that like came into favor and like got popular, and suddenly like even within the industry, like old bourbons became really popular again. Not old age statement wise, but like old bottles, or Amaro or Armagnac, which I feel like is
certainly
seeing such a renaissance right now. Someone just asked barrel agave when.
Yeah, when are we going to see some barrel agave?
Oh man, we talk about that all the time because we all love it so much. But I don't think that one is going to happen anytime soon because of the cultural implication. We're Americans, and people aren't making agave distillate in America. And the only way we would be able to do it is to contract production down into Mexico, which is just so far out of the scope of what we do right now.
That's fair.
But I love when I get that question because it's like really heartwarming for someone to have the trust in us that we would be able to do an agave distillate. And so like, I wish we could. But I
can respect that. I mean, we just brought in our very first run of agave for the group that I'm a part of, Aficionados. And I mean, that was a tremendous amount of work, and like keeping it about the producer is super difficult, but worthwhile. But yeah, so I can get that. So to bring it to America, I have to ask, are you guys ever going to try a gin? I know we were talking about it either at the very beginning or in the green room, but like, when can we see barrel gin, or like a barrel aged gin? Oh boy, that's a rabbit.
Again, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and say we'll never do it, and also tell you we'll do it right away. It's not in the plans right now.
Okay.
And I saw a question about our distillate soon too. Every time we think we're going to pull the trigger on having a like functioning day-to-day distillery, which costs many millions of dollars to put into, right when we're talking about it, we get a call from someone and there's like a ton of 9-year-old Kentucky bourbon available, but we have to pay right then. And what we've decided, we've learned in a good way, is people look to us for really great blended spirits. And we really like working with old stuff. And at least for the time being, we want to be the best at sourcing and finishing and blending in the country. That's our goal. And so, we don't have any immediate plans to produce any distillate in any meaningful way. We have a couple of test stills that we work on, and like we have this like experiment that we always go back to where we distill Dovetail and we make like an 160 something proof eau de vie of Dovetail.
Because why not?
Yeah, so like we might do something like that, but we're not planning on pivoting into our own distillate as the base of our products. And even if we did, the goal would be to have it be one of the ingredients, not the ingredient.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there's so many brands out there that create a brand image sourcing and then they pivot into their own, and it's really complicated for them on how to change that brand image. And we love what we do and we don't want to change what we're doing. And so we're going to continue to just like lean into being more and more experimental and polishing more and more about the way that we blend, and also like digging deeper into sourcing and having older and older stocks and vaster and vaster opportunities and ingredients to blend out of. There's a lot of people investing a lot of money in distilling, and it's cool, and we hope they make great things, and we want to work with them.
Yeah,
cool.
I think that's smart.
Yeah, I think that is smart. And we've seen a lot of companies that have staked their reputation on sourcing, and then their own distillant isn't anywhere near as good as what they're sourcing, and that introduces complexity for everybody. So I think that's
it can be hard to bounce back from that.
Cool. What else do we want to talk about? We're kind of through the 3 whiskeys. We can revisit them. I could talk about some of the stuff that's coming out.
Why don't you
other questions in the chat? I'd love to answer them, or if I missed some.
Why don't we take a 10-minute foray into what you guys have come up, and then we'll wrap up so we don't take your whole evening. But
I'd love to hear a little bit about what's coming.
I always take guesses into what I think we'll see from Barrel, so it'd be nice to get some insight into that.
You want to guess first, or you want me to?
I mean, so you guys are doing the Amaro stuff, which I think is interesting. I would have hoped that we're seeing like new rum finishes. I really want to see more brandy finishes, so I'm going to hope that we see like an Armagnac finish. I think that'd be neat, especially we're bringing in tons of Armagnac and Cognac, so it'd be cool to see those barrels ending up as a finish for Barrel. But beyond that, you guys make it hard because I would have been like, hey, try an apricot, but apparently you guys have done that and sold 1 million barrels of that already. So that's off my list. Like, you're killing my bingo card here.
So first off, batch 25 is out right now, even though we didn't taste it tonight. It just came out recently. It was the first batch we ever put out that had a wheated bourbon component in it. So it's not all wheated, but there is some wheated in it. And we're really excited about that. And our warehouse is sold out of that. So our distributors have plenty of stock and stores have plenty of stock, but we are done with it, which was wild. It happened a lot faster than we thought it would, which is cool. We have a series of whiskeys, the private release whiskeys, which are the roughly 180 bottles each with a different finish. And the AH series, which was the first 36 or so of them, happened at the beginning of this year, and the BH series happened a couple months ago and is available in stores, but is all allocated out. The CH series, which is the next 48 of them, will be available in the middle or the end of October. And if you go to our website, you can see all the different finishes. I think we're up to 34 different finishes available. And so there is Armagnac and there is Cognac.
Okay.
So that will happen. And there is the St. Agrestis Amaro finish and also a Sicilian Amaro finish included in that. Speaking of Sicilian Amaro, we have our next release, which is a sibling of Dovetail that is coming out in the middle of October. It's called Armida. Oak Bottle just said do a Tokai finish, and we are one step ahead of Oak Bottle. There's, I believe, 4 Tokai finishes available in that. But
diggity.
There's 6 Puconios, if anyone wants to ask. And there's a couple of those. In fact, I'm not sure if it's available anymore, but one of the Joe's playlist that was a private release was a Tokai finish. It was called Hungarian Fair. Track 1? Track 2? I can't remember which track it was. So Armida is a blend of all bourbons, but we declassified it out of the bourbon category because there's finishes on it. It is Jamaican rum, Sicilian Amaro, and pear brandy finish blended together.
Oh, cool.
There's only 600 6-packs of it to start based on the availability of the pear brandy barrels. And so it's going to be small to start. But it's sort of positioned as a sibling to Dovetail. It's line priced with the Dovetail and the Batch of Bourbon and the Batch of Rye. And that'll be out in October, and then it'll be out again in December or January when there'll be a little bit more of it at that point. And so it'll be more of a national release then. It's going everywhere. It's just only a couple cases to most states. 600 cases sounds like a lot, but when you think about all of the stores that want a 6-pack, it's not that many anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 10 cases a state, 12 cases a state. That doesn't go very far at all. Yeah,
and especially that there's certain states that they need to have 60 or 80 just to not upset anyone.
Yeah, I can see that.
So that's happening, and then so in the private release series, we started with rum, which are all the different blends of rum that had different finishes.
Yeah.
We moved on to whiskey. We did all the whiskeys that had different finishes. We are releasing, I want to say November, but it might be December 1st. The private release bourbon line. There's 48 of them. There is no finishing on it because we are at this point in the history of bourbon still feel that bourbon is no longer bourbon if it's finished in a secondary cask. But it's 48 different combinations of 5, 9, 13, and 15-year-old bourbon. And the percentages of those breakdowns of ages are on the front label of the bottle. So each release has slightly different breakdowns of ages, and they're 180 or so bottles each. So they're about a private barrel. And so we are going to phase them into our bourbon private barrel program, where you can either pick a single barrel or you can pick a unique component blend at the same yield.
Okay.
And so there'll be 48 of those to start. So we're sort of expanding the private release program, mostly because we are so into blending. And even though we really like having single barrels for people, it's a little bit at odds with our feelings about what we can do when we blend. And so this is our way of synthesizing those two things.
That's really cool.
The BCS bourbon, the 15-year gray label 3-pack gift box, is out again starting right about now. That comes out about once a year. So it's out earlier this year, and it'll make it to stores soon if it hasn't already. And since you love rum, the BCS rum actually came out about a month and a half ago. There were only 580 bottles for the country this year because of the yields on the old rum barrels we used. And so we did not make a thing out of it. We just let some people order it and pretended it never happened.
Damn.
Sneak one in.
No,
I got to start really surveilling you guys. I need to get all who's watching me in the bushes to see what you guys are doing.
So I say that quickly because I know it's 6 releases in the next 2 months, but that's what's coming from Barrel in the next.
Well, hot diggity! I'm excited. Know that I'm up here in Wisconsin with my binoculars, just watching.
You've got our information, so if you ever want to try anything, you guys know where to find us.
Yeah, hot diggity. Cool, man. Well, what do you say, John? Should we wrap up this party? We usually keep it to an hour, but tonight we just couldn't resist.
Drinking all sorts of whiskey, man. Sometimes it's easy to let it go.
I am verbose, and I know it. So
that's why we love you.
Cool. Well, why don't you go ahead and lead us on out, Will? Let us know. I mean, you've been more than generous with your information, but if you have any other places that people can find you or anything you'd like to say, we'll let you close on out, and then we'll close this party down. But thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for having me. Yeah, you can find us. Pretty much all of our handles are Barrel Bourbon. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, although we don't do a lot of tweeting, but we're there. You can email us, contact@barrelbourbon.com. Any questions you have. I will most likely be the person that answers it if it's a complicated question. So I am happy to play Stump Will. We really look forward to hearing from whoever wants to know more about the company, and we're gonna just keep trying to do what we do. And I can't wait to come back and chat with you guys about other releases sometime soon.
Hell yeah. I think, we might talk about some other spirits the next time you're on. But Thanks, Will, so much. For you guys watching, you guys are no stranger to me. I am Jay from Take.Review. We should have more bourbon news for you next week on the Bourbon Single Barrel program for our bourbon. But in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on my website, Take.Review. Yeah, I think that's it. John, why don't you go ahead and take us home?
I dig it. Again, thanks, Will. This has been great. I really appreciate you guys sending us some of the stuff to try, talk about, have a good time. I'm John, the Bourbon Finder. You can find me at TheBourbonFinder.com or at The Bourbon Finder. And we'll see you guys next week when we're going to sit down and do this all over again with more whiskey. So until then, cheers, guys.
Have a good night.